Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2019 Lunch and Learn series. I'm Commissioner Poirier, and I am the chair of the Issue and Education Committee for the Community Relations Commission. Thank you for coming. The committee, the commission, and the staff have one primary goal today. That is to provide us with skills through education so we can respond to discrimination and trauma. We hope to encourage people to think in terms of what happened to you, not what is wrong with you. For the next 2 hours, we hope to introduce skills and promote healthy dialogue. Sharon Stevens from the Cleveland Metropolitan Schools will share funding information. Karen Hewitt and Aaron Upchurch from Kaleidoscope will raise awareness on behalf of the LGBTQIA+ community. Our hope is that after today's session, when interacting with those affiliated to the LGBTQIA+ community, we embrace what we learn and we engage from a trauma-informed perspective. Exposure to trauma manifests itself in many forms. Today's session will enhance our ability to address and identify discrimination and trauma in the LGBTQIA+ community. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy the presentation and visit us for our 2 remaining Lunch and Learns. One will be on national origin, the other will be on religion. We'll be sending flyers out for those shortly. Enjoy your Hound Dogs Pizza and have a fabulous session. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sharon Stevens. I am the manager of Cleveland Metropolitan School District's Responsible Sexual Behavior Program. We are a kindergarten through 12th grade comprehensive sexuality education program. For those of you who aren't familiar with what comprehensive sex ed is, that means that although we teach that abstinence is the best way to avoid unintended pregnancies and sexually transmitted infections, we also teach students skills about condom use skills and contraceptives so that they can protect themselves if they choose to be sexually active. So this is the 13th year of comprehensive K through 12 comprehensive sex ed in Cleveland Metropolitan School District. But I'd like to give you a little background about our program. Up until 2006, we only focused on teaching sexual health education to our middle school students, 7th and 8th grade students. Well, 2006, the country was recognizing the 25th anniversary of the first reported case of AIDS. And our paper, The Plain Dealer, did a little expose on the state of AIDS in Cleveland after 25 years. And our mayor, Frank Jackson, was surprised to find out the high rates of HIV and AIDS in Cleveland, but especially among our youth. So he inquired what was being done in our schools to educate our students about this important issue. So our mayor got together with our county commissioners, and they put up the grant funding to take our program to scale for grades K through 12. So we've been K through 12 sex education for 13 years now. Since this inception, our program has always been grant funding. So in 2013, the CDC put out a funding announcement for a select group of school districts, and we happen to be one of the ones on the list that we could apply for their new funding cycle. Unfortunately, some of the reasons we qualified for this particular funding were because of the high poverty rates in our city and also the high HIV rates. So we were received our first CDC grant funding in 2013. And so that 5-year cycle ended in July 2018. We reapplied for this new funding cycle, and I'm happy to say that we were awarded another CDC grant. So we were one of only 28 local education agencies in the nation to receive this funding. So this funding cycle goes from August 2018 to July 2023. And the overall goals of the grant are to reduce chronic absenteeism, to improve school connectedness. School connectedness is when students believe that the adults and their peers at their school care about them and also care about their learning and achieving. So school connectedness is a big focus of our grant. We also work to decrease barriers to learning, barriers being things like students contracting sexually transmitted infections or unintended pregnancies or being bullied. And we also work to reduce disparities experienced by our LGBT youth. The grant has 3 main areas of focus. The first is sexual health education. So we work to increase the number of students who receive our sexual health curriculum. And we also work to make sure that students have the basic knowledge and skills that they need to make healthy decisions and to avoid those risk behaviors like sexually transmitted infections and unintended pregnancies. The second component is sexual health services, where we work to link students to youth-friendly healthcare providers. Because as we all know, healthy students learn better. If a student is out sick with a sexually transmitted infection, or if they have to leave school because of an unintended pregnancy, it can really have an effect on them achieving their goals. So we work to link students to sexual health services so that they know what minors' rights to health services are in the state of Ohio, so that they can seek the services they need to keep themselves safe and to keep themselves in school to achieve their goals. We also work to educate our staff, so staff knows what resources are available in the community and where they can refer students. And finally, the third component is safe and supportive environments. And this is where our LGBT youth-focused work takes place. So in regarding safe and supportive environments, we work to promote healthy and safe schools for all students. Again, promote school connectedness and promote parent engagement. Because we know that if parents are engaged, if parents are caring, that it has a big effect on our students achieving their goals. So before we received our CDC grant funding, we had minimal resources for our LGBTQ youth. And we realized that we were going to have to start with our staff. We needed to create some protective factors for our LGBTQ students, so a big part had to do with our professional development training for our staff. Because 1 in 5 CMSD students identifies as LGBTQ. We got this information from our Youth Risk Behavior Survey. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, it's a survey. It was developed by the CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. It is administered every other year. In odd number years, it's administered in our high schools. In even number years, it's administered in our middle school. So during our 2017 YRBS, one of the questions on there is, how do you identify and 1 out of 5 students said that they identify as LGBT. So when you think about an average classroom of 30 students, that's 6 students in that room that identify as LGBT. So it's good that our teachers have this information, because a lot of times, you know, they make assumptions and they say, you know, I don't have any LGBTQ students in my class. But if you get them to look at it as, you know, don't make those assumptions. Always go with, there are some LGBTQ students in the room. Because we knew that our students were facing some serious challenges that many of our cisgender students aren't facing, like stigma, discrimination, being bullied, family and social rejection, and even violence. So we wanted to put some protective factors in place to support our LGBT youth, because we know these different challenges can lead to numerous negative health disparities, depression, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, risky sexual behaviors. So we needed to put some things in place to help support our students. So first of all, we wanted to increase staff knowledge and skills. Many of our staff had not participated in any kind of LGBTQ competency training. So we provide annual training for staff on an LGBT-focused issue. We're working to establish gay-straight alliances. We also call them diversity clubs in our schools, so that our LGBTQ youth have a supportive group that they can go to in the schools. We work to create safe space or safe zones. So we train certain staff so that they can identify their room as a safe space where students can come, you know, if they just need some quiet time, or if they need someone to talk to. And we make sure that the staff identifies their room with certain posters so that the student knows immediately that this room is a safe place or a safe haven where they can come. And it's important that, you know, that the staff member wants to be a willing participant. Oftentimes we do hold our safe zone trainings, and some of the staff members might still not feel comfortable saying that they want their room to be a designated area. And you know, that's okay. We kind of work in baby steps, and we don't want them to hang up the poster if they're not going to be a welcoming, receptive person. And we also work to link our students to resources in the community. So since we got this CDC training, CDC grant, since our first funding in 2013, 50% of our schools now have at least one designated safe space, a space where students can go, talk to the staff member, or if they just need a quiet place to sit and gather themselves. Over 500 CMSD staff have participated in an LGBT-focused training. And like I said, this training is ongoing annually. And we are continually working to establish gay-straight alliances or diversity clubs. Our goal is to have one in every school. This year, we hope to have one in every high school. It's been a little bit more challenging establishing them in middle schools, because a lot of middle school staff are under the assumption that we don't have LGBT students in our school. So A lot of times in middle schools, we'll label them as diversity clubs, or sometimes the students will come up with their own name for the group. But that's one thing that we're continuing to do, working to establish student-led support groups for our LGBT youth. So when we talk about inclusive classroom practices with our staff, again, we let them know, don't make assumptions about your students' sexual orientation or gender. Always assume that there are LGBTQ students in the room. Use inclusive language, and what goes along with that, using inclusive language, is, don't ignore homophobic remarks that you might hear from your students, or that you might hear from your fellow staff members. So we really try to build our staff to be an ally for our students. Be mindful of your personal biases. We all have personal biases, but that still shouldn't prevent you from being a support for our students. Acknowledge and respect everyone's differences. And it's important to know, again, we always emphasize with our staff that, any caring adult can be an ally, a supportive resource for our LGBT youth. And we try to emphasize how important it is for our students to have that adult ally that they can count on and depend on. And bottom line is, we're here to support our students. Now, I'd like to share with you a short video. We might have to stop it, I'm sorry to say, but this video was written by one of our transgender students, and it really speaks to the social rejection, isolation, bullying that many of our LGBT youth experience.
Hey.
Hi. Did I wake you?
Nah, I've been up for a while. What's up today?
Nothing much. Can you turn on your webcam?
Yeah, sure. Damn.
Damn.
You look great! I was wondering when you were gonna try that on.
Thanks. I'm kind of going out like this.
But I thought you said...
I know, I just can't be afraid anymore. I gotta be me.
I mean, that's how I felt my first time. Taryn, you look hot.
Thanks, Gabby. I'm a little scared though.
Well, just be careful. But just be you.
Yeah. So, talk to you later?
Yeah.
All right. Oh, yeah. Bye. Bye, Dad.
Taryn, come back here. Is this a joke? What are you doing dressed like that, and where'd you get those clothes anyway?
The thrift store.
What, for Halloween?
No, Dad.
It's what?
I just feel better when I wear this.
Better.
Yeah, I feel like me.
I had a son, not a daughter. I took my son to football games, taught him how to wrestle. Told him about how to talk to girls, not how to be one.
Dad, please. I'm still the same.
No, you're not. And you're not going out like that.
No, Dad, I am going out like this.
Fine. It's your life.
Oh my God. Is that Taryn Spring?
Is he a tranny now, or am I just seeing it?
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Did you get a picture?
Yeah, I'm totally putting that
Hey,
on Facebook.
listen, you two need to get to class. Get your things, let's go.
Right. Class.
Yeah, right.
Today just sucked.
Oh, sending you my love, Taryn.
Me too.
I still can't believe you're on here, Che.
Tris told me about it and said maybe you could help.
Trey just needs some advice is all.
Of course. You could have told me alone too. I'm pretty much the main person here at Vice. You don't need to use the chat just for that, you know.
Sorry, I know. It's just, I've been trying to figure myself out lately. And I might feel more like a boy, possibly.
So, what are you asking exactly?
I Googled it, and it's called gender variance. Do you think people would be okay with me switching it up like that?
You know you don't need to prove your gender to anyone, right? You don't need to change your look, or take hormones, or get an operation if you don't feel it's right for you. Being trans is it's just how you feel inside.
Uh-huh, like Trey. I'm gender fluid, so I just take it day by day. Sometimes I feel more like a boy, other times I feel more like a girl, and I just go with it. I mean, my thing is just make sure you're doing what you want to. Now you feel like you need to, okay?
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks so much, you guys. And can I keep bothering you about it if I need to?
Yeah, sure, it's okay.
Hey, sorry to interrupt, but Taryn, you look on Facebook yet?
No?
Get back!
Get him! Get him! Get him, Ty! Punch that train! Beat him up!
Come on, get him! Get him!
Get him! Come on! Get up! Come on!
Take my phone and keep filming.
Come on!
Hold him up.
Bag! Keep going.
What happened to you?
Some kids, 4 or 5, I don't know.
What did I tell you?
Dad, I didn't provoke them or anything. They just ganged up on me.
Why are you doing this, Taryn? For fun?
Of course not. I'm just trying to be myself.
And who is that, Taryn? A girl?
It's not that simple, Dad.
Then what is it? Explain it to me.
I wish I could. I really wish I could. I mean, for years, I've been feeling like this. For years, I have tried to stop this. I have tried to be your perfect son. But the feelings, they just don't go away. This is not a phase, Dad.
You're 16. You don't have any idea who you are.
I know exactly who I am.
I don't understand. What did I do wrong?
Nothing. You did nothing wrong. You did everything right, and I love you for it. I just hope that you love me, no matter who I am.
Oh my God. What happened to you?
You could probably see it on YouTube by now, but I'm good. Perfectly peachy.
I wish I didn't live on the other side of the country. I wish I could just hug you and kiss you and make the pain go away.
Hey, Taryn. I hope I'm not bothering, but can I ask you about something?
Yeah, sure. Of course.
Well, I've been trying to figure out how to explain my gender stuff to the others. And you go by they, right? Not he or she. How do you choose something like that?
Well, you just have to find the word that feels right for you.
The others won't mind if I have trouble deciding.
If they're really your friends, they'll support you no matter what you want to be called.
Taryn, are you okay?
Well, I've been staying home since it happened.
Really? You haven't been back to school?
I can't go back. I just can't.
I understand, but you've given me so much strength in the time I've known you, and you're like the strongest person I know. If you don't go back, that means they win. You aren't gonna let them win, right?
It's been about a week since I left school. I thought to myself, maybe I should just hide. I thought maybe I could be powerful by ignoring the people who have power over me. But I don't want to hide anymore. Don't get me wrong, I am not changing for any of you. This is me, the new me, and I'm coming back. I am trans, and I'm proud of it. See you all tomorrow.
Taryn. I do love you. You're my child, and I love you no matter what.
Oh my gosh.
When you're gonna stop amusing yourself, stop accusing yourself, giving every excuse to not believe in yourself. Love is all you need. Close your eyes and breathe. Let go. Let it all go. It's time to forget now the one who matters enough. Let it go.
Hi, my name is Skylar Edge, and I was a sophomore at Facing History in New Tech High School when I wrote my film, House Not Home. To learn more about my film and how to use it in your school, go to www.scenariosusa.org.
Please don't cry. There will come a time when you understand.
So Skylar was one of our students, and he was apprehensive about coming out to the school, his peers, and so he wrote this film. And I think it does a good job speaking to many of the issues that our LGBT youth face today. Well, thank you. I understand we're going to take questions at the end of our next speaker's presentation, but thank you. It was a pleasure being here today.
So I am honored, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speakers here. They are from Kaleidoscope, and they're going to really, I think, get you interactive, and you're going to learn something, and they're just dynamic speakers. So we have Aaron Upchurch to the left over here, who is the Executive Director of Kaleidoscope, and we have this young lady right here, who is Karen Hewitt, and she is the Deputy Director of Kaleidoscope. So enjoy your learning experience, and if there's any pizza, you're welcome to it. And of course, we have water in the back. So thank you for being here.
Hello, everyone. It's so good to be here. As Gail said, my name is Erin Upchurch. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Executive Director of Kaleidoscope Youth Center. And I just want to say I am actually a former commissioner, and it's really nice to see some of my former colleagues here. And thank you for continuing to do the work that you are doing. And to all of you in the room for being here today. These are things that Karen and I, and we talk about, and we're deeply entrenched in every single day. But for you to show up, to want to learn and be a part of it, we really appreciate. So I'll talk about Kaleidoscope. We are, how many of you have heard of Kaleidoscope Youth Center? Awesome. So I'm going to brag about us for a moment. We are the largest and longest standing organization in the state of Ohio to serve and support LGBTQIA+ youth and young adults. This is our 25th anniversary year. We started in 1994. And we started as a Rainbow Crisis line, the 24/7 line that was staffed. And we have evolved into an organization. We have a drop-in center at 603 East Town. We open every day at 3:30 for ages 12 to 20. We're there from 3:30 to 7 with different activities. We are the hub for the statewide GSA network. We provide education and training throughout the state to teachers, youth providers, doctors, community members, all types of things. And this year, we're really excited because we've expanded to include things like case management, behavioral health and support, and housing services for homeless or housing insecure or vulnerable young adults 18 to 24. And so we'll be doing case management and support for 16 to 24. And then the housing services, we have 3 programs from 18 to 24. And we're just in the final stages of launching those within the next couple of weeks. So we're very excited about the work that we're doing here and the ways that we've grown.
Hello, I'm Karen Hewitt, Deputy Director at Kaleidoscope. I've been on since October, and my role primarily is to be support for all of our departments, so whether it be housing, education, programming, those are the things that I'm typically involved in all across the board. And then really just being a support system for our managers and a visible advocate and representative for our youth. So that is where I am moving, and we're just going to talk about empowered resilience and trauma in our experiences and what that looks like. I originally started out in education and was a math undergrad and went into college coaching. So I've been working with youth since I was out of college, and then went to education and policy, thought I might want to be a principal of some sort, and then I realized that workforce development, strategic human capital, and those type of things were my jam. So then I wound up going to school at Ohio State, the Ohio State, and I realized that youth, I can mix the both. So youth and social justice and education and those type of things could all be a part of what my daily life looks like. And when we talk about Kaleidoscope, people are so grateful that it exists. And I can only imagine what that would have looked like for me in my experience if a place like it did exist here. I'm from Cincinnati. I didn't have that experience. I didn't have that type of support. And I can only imagine what my growth would have looked like differently if that would have been an availability or option for me.
So what we're going to do is we're going to go through some language and definitions because we believe in shared language in a room. We are going to then talk about just higher level, overview of trauma, how that shows up in our nervous systems and daily lives, what that looks like to be a part of a marginalized or oppressed community, so part of the queer community. And then we're going to talk about what we all can do to make the world a little softer place for our young folks and for each other. So understanding this could be a 3-hour conversation. We know that we don't have that time. I'm fine with you asking questions as we go. I think that helps with the dialogue, so please feel free to do that. So before we do that, we are going to do a little activity. And I'd like you to just have a partner, maybe groups of 3. You can do groups of 3, I think. And share your names. And I want you to tell each other, like share your gender, like how you identify, and then share how you knew. So like if I was talking to Karen, I'd be like, Karen, I identify as a woman, I grew up identifying as a girl, and then I would share how I first knew I was a girl. Does that make sense? Yes? All right, so it's a quick, so just like kind of jump in. We'll do about 7 minutes. So get in like small groups and tell everybody your name and your experience of your gender. How did you know who you were?
He's coming back. I'm Rebecca.
I love all the conversation, and I love that you all are into it. So if you could begin to kind of finish up your last thoughts, we're going to move forward. What was that like for you? Anyone?
Doesn't happen every day.
No?
That conversation.
I'm so glad. First time for everything. What else? What did that feel like? What was it like to have to think about when you knew your gender, who you were?
I think it's something you don't think about.
Right. Absolutely.
Like how natural it is for us, because like if you feel natural about something, it's not something that you like second guess. So it's strange for us to think that there's people out there who don't have that same experience.
In any kind of a marginalized group, and the layers, it could be the layers of that, right? It's this constant having to negotiate your many selves in a space where some folks don't ever have to negotiate. And because sometimes the space just calls for just who they are or the perception of who they are, and all of that is okay. But if you're outside of any of those lines, you're maybe needing to negotiate yourself depending on the space. So that question or that need to think about, just as we think about that.
Sure, and if you didn't grow up in a place where there's language either, like you may have been struggling for like how to even define it. Yes?
Sharing in that way, having that conversation is not something I recall ever doing before. And slightly apprehensive as you started to describe it, and wondering but it turned out to be far more comfortable, far easier than I would have expected. And I think that would be, I guess I can't speak for you, but it seemed to be the same for both of us.
Great. Yes.
So I found it was interesting. My response became I wasn't conflicted about what I was told I was supposed to be, or I assumed I am what I'm supposed to be.
Ooh, that's deep.
And so I'm like, it's only from other people's stories who have shared that they were conflicted about having to wear a dress, or play with dolls, or play with trucks, or whatever, that I know that I am what I'm supposed to be.
Very layered, right? And, you know, and Karen's going to talk more about some language and definitions, but when we think about transgender identities, non-binary identities, we don't typically think about it unless there's some variance, right? Like we just all grow up, we were told to be who we were. I was told, and I was a girl and I was young, and that happened to fit with my internal identity, so I go with it. But we don't even tend to think about it. And then think about the fact that you did this in a public way. So typically, I don't talk about my gender identity in public, but for folks who are part of the trans community or non-binary community, not only is it public discourse, so think about news and legislation and bathrooms and all this stuff that's a public conversation, and even with like the LGBT community in general, like the Methodist Church, whether it's right or wrong, like this is a community whose identities are in the public for people to debate whether or not they have a right to exist. So just think about that for a moment, especially as a young person and you're growing up in this world, and you turn on the TV and you hear somebody saying like, no, it's wrong. They don't, this is not okay, this is not safe, this is a perversion, all these different words that get layered onto it. And so thank you for bringing up the privilege, even of moving through the world in a body that is not discussed in this way. So I'm gonna have Karen talk a bit more about their story.
All right, so as I moved through the work, I mentioned in Cincinnati, I didn't really have a place to go through this. So a lot of times, I was raised in the church, so there's that's a whole nother 3-hour training that we'll do, and my dad will be there. No, I'm just kidding. I love you. But we, you know, we wore skirts down to below our knees, and you weren't allowed to sing, or you weren't allowed to if you didn't have that apparel. So I was the one with shorts under my skirts playing football before Bible study and doing those type of things, and it was just, oh, I was an athlete. And so I got away with it for a while, and then coming college, it was just sweats. Like, it was just clothes like that. So as I got into really the work and youth and being in that place where I was getting to know people, I realized that there were other opportunities for me to express myself. And so I'm gonna talk a little bit about you know, the evolution, and in that I do have my shared experience of she, her, and now Z here as a non-attached pronoun for me. I'm not attached to pronouns. It doesn't explain me, but it also gives you a ability to talk about me if I'm not there. So there are different levels of it, and I think it means something different to everyone in that space. So I think we get to give the respect to those people in that space. So I'm gonna move through some terminology.
Can I say
oh
one
yeah,
thing?
go ahead.
I just want to acknowledge as we begin to dive into this and talk about some different things that just briefly, so I teach at OSU in the College of Social Work. In one of my classes, we talk about forms of resistance when we start to talk about diversity and culture and bias. And there's 3. One is cognitive, emotional, and then there's behavioral. The cognitive one is where we have a hard time believing the world is just as it is. And so an example is if I share experience of racism with somebody, your response might be like, oh no, that probably wasn't what happened. They could have just been having a bad day. So it's not, you cannot wrap your head around how bad it is. The emotional is like the anxiety, anger, shame, guilt. Like it just, this is uncomfortable sometimes, and it's intolerable, and it should be. Oppression should be intolerable, and that's how it changes when we begin to experience that. And the last one is just this behavioral of like, there's so much to do, one person can't change it, or where do we even start? So it's this sense of it being heavy and not knowing where to go. And what I just want to do is just kind of hold that in the room and validate that those feelings and thoughts may come up, and like, that's great, I'm glad that happens. But to remember there's always an and in that part of the story, because I might feel shame and I might feel anger and the and is what else can you do? What is the next step you take? Is it, you know, how do you engage with somebody to do what we like to call reducing the harm, reducing our imprint of harm in our communities? And so I just wanted to put that out there, and so if you start to have that stuff come up, you can be like, oh, that's great, I'm right where I should be.
More discomfort, yes. So we talk about the agreements. Some of these are pulled from our agreements that we use in our drop-in center, and this is just part of creating safe spaces and affirming spaces. So respect others, experiences, identities, and boundaries. All right, respect ourselves. This is a space to grow, to get and give support, to be our best selves. As Aaron said, if those things start coming up, you can use a little grace with yourself, as well as with the understanding that we're bringing to you. Be physically safe, be emotionally safe. Any discussion points or sharings are confidential. We typically say if you want to share with permission, like you get permission, and to ask for consent. So if that story moves you, if something happens and you want to share it, ask for consent. And maybe they'll say, yes, I don't mind if you use my name, or no, don't use my name, but you can use my story. So that could change that. All right, terminology, LGBTQ+. The reason why we use the plus, So we have lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender or trans, queer or questioning. And queer, just to be clear, has often been given a negative connotation, and it's almost a reclaim of that word at this time with our youth. And so a lot of times we are youth-led, so we let them define and share with us where they're at. So queer is typically type of an umbrella term. And then these are sexualities, the lesbian, gay, and bisexual, and we'll talk a little bit more about those. Gender identity is under trans or transgender. And then all of the above, queer, questioning, we talk about that as an umbrella. And questioning gives the person room to explore. The plus includes intersex, which is an actual sexual identification. And then anybody else under there that is looking for a term or finding and exploring themselves. We give them that room. We basically say when the youth tell us something, we believe them. Sexual orientation. Pansexual, bisexual, gay, straight, lesbian, queer, questioning, asexual. How many of you see a term on there that you aren't sure of? Okay, great. So I'm going to talk about them.
He has one over here.
You guys one over here?
Pansexual.
Great. Pansexual. Pansexual is the identity, sexual orientation-wise, that you do not exclude any gender or non-conforming gender. It's a connection to all people, humans, energies, sexually. Okay? As far as these go, asexual, we have a lot of youth that identify as asexual. And we're going to get into that a little bit more. Asexual typically means romantically or sexually. They may be romantically asexual or sexually asexual. There are differences in terms of how they explore, and they're young. So some of them are like, I'm asexual, and they don't have that type of sexual intimacy. As far as gender identity, a person's innermost core concept of who they are, and we're gonna see something really cool here shortly about that. Cisgender or cis, that is when you are born and given a sex at birth, assigned at birth, we call it the sex assigned at birth, then that is what you identify with. Transgender or trans, okay? So we have that where someone whose gender identity does not match their sex assigned at birth. And non-binary or gender queer. So both masculine and feminine, or neither masculine nor feminine. So as far as I'm concerned, I am gender fluid, gender queer. I can be either at a given day or time. And what that typically means is moving across the spectrum. It's how I want to express myself. My identity isn't defined by a binary, right? But my expression may look presenting female or male depending on the day. All right, so these are terms that we use. And so where does this show up for us? And if you think about it, when we talk, going back to that privilege, when we talk about where does this show up for us, think about how many times you see these things on your surveys, on your insurance forms, every day as you move about the world. Are these options? Are these options for you? Right? You just female, male, we just check the box and then we move on about our day. And so every day we're facing these things with gender identity, cisgender female, transgender female, totally different. And when we look at gender fluid versus trans, so we're looking at sometimes the transgender community, of course they're attached to pronouns, right? That's their identity that wasn't their assigned sex at birth. And then somebody who's non-binary isn't attached to pronouns at all. So it's actually quite different, and sometimes we get in the habit of lumping those two together, and they're not necessarily together. So personal pronouns. I want you to get back with your groups for like 2 minutes, and I want you to think of a story about yourself, and I want you to use the pronouns or a friend of yours or something that happened in the last 2 days, and I want you to use they, them pronouns only. Okay, so talk about someone or a story that happened to you using they, them pronouns only. All right, get to it. I'm timing. So while we're chatty, how did that feel? Awkward? I heard awkward? Okay. How else did that feel? That's cool. You got a good word over here? How did that feel? I feel like there's some good stuff over here. How would that feel?
Well, when we were talking, when she was talking, every time she said they, she didn't know me, but every time she said they, I was like, who's she talking about?
That's funny.
I had to stop myself though. Every time I said they, I had to stop. It was just awkward.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you all for sharing that activity. As we move through they, them, I realized one thing for me, they, them was othering. So as a Black female presenting individual, that was something that I was like, well, if I'm gonna use other pronouns, it's definitely not gonna be they, them. And that was my personal experience. However, you know, it is viewed now as a singular pronoun, and they, them, if someone wants to be identified as they, them, they get to be identified as they, them. We talked about it just now. We find it almost sometimes we're saying they, them so much, and then we're like, well, I definitely want to honor their pronouns that they choose. So it's work either way. It's work. So gender unicorn, this is the gender unicorn, and I'll go back to the PowerPoint, and this is something we use with all of our trainings. I don't think anyone's ever too old for unicorns. So gender identity, we see, as you can see on these arrows, it's a sliding scale, right? Like it's a scale. And so you get to determine what that looks like. For me, my gender identity is gonna be somewhere along that female, somewhere along that male, and somewhere along other. And so it's gonna look different for every single person. This is something that, a tool that we use to kind of show the difference between gender identity, gender expression, sexual attraction, physical attraction, and emotional attraction. I know in conversations, even here with my father, like, yeah, I'm emotionally attracted to men, and like that's okay. And there's the veil of like, you know, masculinity or not having or not being attached to anything but being emotionally connected to someone, whoever, people, that's okay. And that it's all part of all of these things on the spectrum. And then we also have sex assigned at birth, where people can plug that in. And so I've noticed that mine will change every day. Go ahead, you have a question about this one specifically?
Because there's this idea of what a look of a gender is, right? And so going back to that negotiating spaces, it's this, here's what society says the gender presentation, or the presentation of this particular gender is, and like, who defined that? You know what I mean? Like, who designated that?
Right.
You know, so I think that adds to that layer of negotiating, even just presenting, let alone identifying. Right?
Absolutely, and so that identity is important, and that's like really where, and that's a whole nother training too, but that's a binary, and that's what binary does. It constricts, it places in a box, and it says these things are okay over here, these things are okay over here, and in between is awkward, weird, not normal, and not okay. And so that's the debunking of this, is really talking about, actually, today I'm over here. Today I'm over here, and that's what that feels like, and that's okay. So owning that and like accepting yourself in those spaces. All right, I think it's your turn. I'm gonna send it over to Erin. She's gonna talk a little bit about trauma.
If I could
go ahead.
Go back a tiny bit to the pronoun conversation.
Sure.
I guess I struggle with pronouns primarily because I don't like to use pronouns at all. And there are ways of identifying people, such as by their name, what they like to be called, that is both more specific to that person and not interchangeable in any way, and also clearer, because oftentimes where there's several pronouns in a paragraph, it's not clear who she is referring to if there's more than one female, or so you know, I guess I've always found it, I think, to be both easier and clearer, but more respectful of the person that I'm referring to in using his or her name.
Yes, absolutely. And for our young people, especially around like gender identity and how they're seen in the world, it is a matter of life and death. It is a matter of how they see themselves, how they feel like they can get up every day to be seen as who they are. So every single day at Kaleidoscope, we do a check-in circle, and we do names, we do pronouns, and then like a highlight and low light. And so every single day they get to say, this is who I am. These are the pronouns I use. And that's how they want to be seen. And so for somebody who is transgender, non-binary, who is negotiating gender, exploring gender, having that affirmed is everything. Think about the ways that you need to be affirmed in your own life. Maybe it's not pronouns or gender or sexuality, but think about other things that are important to you to affirm who you are. For our young folks in particular, it is pronouns and gender identity because it's how they want to be seen and read in the world.
And that's the part that I struggle with a bit, because anybody were to ask me, it's Eric, period. You know, don't need anything else, and not necessarily comfortable with anything else.
Sure, and so what we're gonna go back to is this idea of privilege, of where pronouns, for me, like if somebody were to misgender me, I'm okay with that. I'm not gonna be angry, I'm not gonna feel bad about myself, I'm not gonna question who I am in the world. But for a person who is not cisgender and doesn't have that privilege, it matters. It matters a whole lot. And especially for young people, again, who are trying to establish who they are in the world, and we all want to be seen for something. Every single person in here, it's part of our basic needs. And we talk about gender and sexuality for our young folks, like it is a matter of life and death for them. And so it is traumatic to be misgendered for young folks, or for anybody who is trans or non-binary or exploring gender. Like, it can be very traumatic. So I appreciate your perspective, and I appreciate where it's coming from. And I think that makes sense. And I try to use people's names when I talk about them. Although we weren't raised to really talk about folks that way when we tell a story. Like, I don't say Karen 15 times in a story. Like, that wasn't how we were raised to talk, right? Or to say they and them all the time. But, so I'll get another example. So my partner is non-binary and uses she and they pronouns. And I was using she because she is an option. But the more I thought about it, I was using she because it's a default pronoun and it was just easy. So I intentionally started using they to say, like, I see you and I want to honor this part of you as well. Right? And so I could have used she and they could have been fine with it, but that was me just kind of being lazy. It was easy. And so it challenges us to just slow down and think about, you know, identity, how we see ourselves, how we see other people, sometimes even around our faith and our religious beliefs. But it's not about us. It's about the other person and how we want to affirm the other person and communicate, hey, you belong here and I see you. That's really what it comes down to. So we're going to talk about the fun, even more fun stuff. I get to talk about trauma. I'm not going to do this exercise just for the sake of time, but what I'd like for you to think about is, you know, when you hear the words trauma or prolonged stress, like, just kind of think about what comes to mind for you. And then, you know, if we had more time, we would talk about some different themes. But I want you to also think about your own personal exposure to trauma or prolonged stress. Whether it's, you know, growing up, whether it's through your work. I'm a social worker. I worked at Netcare. Anybody familiar with Netcare? For 7 years. And I knew I had to leave one day when I was having a conversation. I'm like, oh, I'm great in crisis situations. And I was like, oh, do I want to be great in crisis situations all the time? Like, what does that mean? Where am I at in my life that, like, I can be calm all the time in crisis? So I had to really think about my own well-being and the things I've been exposed to. So just from your workplace, maybe your home life and growing up was, you know, healthy, but then think about your work. And then let's think about the world, like images on TV, the news, what's going on just in society. All of that stuff hits our systems every single day. So we are all navigating and we are stewards of trauma every single day. Briefly, we know trauma results from a set of circumstances or events. What makes it traumatic is that is the impact and the way, you know, it's like it's too much. Our systems can't handle it. And so of course we deal with it and steward it in multiple different ways. But it can be one thing, it could be a single episode, it could be prolonged stress, like ongoing. When I think about prolonged stress, I think about like our students. I'll talk about Columbus City Schools just because it's here in the city, and we know that like 90% of our students are at or below poverty level. Poverty shows up and it changes our brains just like a physical trauma. It's the same impact because it's prolonged stress. It's the day-to-day wear and tear. Think about a pair of shoes. If you wear them every single day, the sole of it gets worn out. The same thing happens to people who experience that every single day. The effects, we know it can be long-term or short-term. It absolutely impacts our coping responses. And so the fancy word is adaptive strategies, but it really is just how you respond to people in the world. So if it's something like if I come over here and if I were to like drop something on the table, you might jump. Like that's a response. That's a startle response. And so if somebody who has experienced a type of trauma or stress where loud noises were part of that story, the response might be even greater and bigger because your system is like, oh my gosh, I'm here to protect this person and they might be in danger. It impacts our relationships, well-being, spiritual beliefs, and just, everything, how we move through the world. And the factors that increase impact is how early it occurred. And so we know that there's prenatal trauma. So while a person is pregnant, the fetus could be experiencing whatever is happening to the person who's carrying them, being silenced or not believed. And so I think we try to isolate trauma around, abuse, neglect, those kind of things. But even think about as a community, if you're part of a marginalized community and nobody believes what you're going through is actually real, that is the same impact. And then the blaming or shaming, well, if you would just do this differently. If we want to talk about trans folks, like if you would just pick a pronoun. Or for people who are gay, why do you have to flaunt it? That's shaming and blaming right there. And then the perpetrator is known or trusted. So again, we can talk about the individual impact of a trauma, a physical trauma, or, in my experience, with maybe a family member who doesn't appreciate my lifestyle, right? And doesn't support it. I use that in quotes because there's no real lifestyle here. There's not a secret one. And so let's talk about, has anybody heard of the ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences? I am such a Dr. Bruce Perry fan, like it's creepy. But so briefly, and just to kind of summarize this stuff, adverse childhood experiences, there was a study done years ago, and essentially, and of course I'm generalizing, is there are about 10 questions that people answer, and based on their responses, they had a score. And what the research showed is the higher the score that somebody had of ACEs, their ACE score, the more likely they were to have that show up later in life. So through like chronic illness, substance use or abuse, other addiction, types of relationships, mental health challenges or symptoms. And so there's a correlation between having these experiences and then how it shows up in people's bodies. So there's this book, if you haven't heard of it, it's called The Body Keeps the Score. Please read it. It's not just for practitioners, it's for the world. Like our bodies hold it all. They will always tell the story. And so our nervous system, essentially it's that fight or flight thing. It's our system's way of responding to something because it thinks there's real or present danger. And so working at NetCare, doors slamming was always a very alarming thing that happened there. And so if somebody were to slam a door at this moment, I know I would jump. It's not cognitive or intentional, this is how my system responds. And so then what I get to do and what I'm able to do because I have resources, I can pause and I can be like, okay, I'm good. But for a lot of people who have survived trauma, they don't have those resources or the capacity to check in immediately. And so they get engulfed in that fight or flight response, which you start to see other types of behaviors or symptoms, which we'll get into shortly. This last one I want to talk about, though, is just because I think we have to always bring in race and ethnicity to these conversations. And so when we look at like cortisol production, and that's the thing that it makes us sick, it impacts us health-wise, but looking at the experiences of stressors that are unpredictable. And so the examples here are like community violence, domestic violence, and so any type of violence that you're not really expecting. And so just thinking about how that happens, to folks of color, to queer folks of color, trans women have the highest rates of murders or homicides. And so those types of things as well. Think about if you are told as a community to worry about this and then you have to walk through the world, you're always hyper-vigilant thinking about it. So that's that hyper-arousal, whether you live there because you're always waiting for the next thing to happen or if it's a response to something. And then dissociation is just really kind of checking out, or it's a way of freezing when something happens. This part that I really enjoy, for lack of a better word, is the state of learned helplessness that can pervade a children's development as they learn through the repeated experience of overwhelming stress to abandon the notion that they can impact the course of their lives in a positive way. How many times do we look at youth who are not performing the way they're supposed to and we say, what? Unmotivated, lazy, they don't care, they're disengaged. But if we could look at their stories, do they even think they can impact their lives positively? Why would they believe that? When have they been connected to their resilience in a way to know they can do something different? Now, I briefly went over this overview of how trauma shows up in our bodies and it keeps a score. Research tells us that experiences of racism, oppression, homophobia, being part of a marginalized community actually shows up in our bodies the exact same way as a type of physical trauma or emotional trauma. It's the same kind of results from like cortisol, adrenal glands, anything, just that stress, that chronic stress that you live under. And so identity-based experiences we know can be frequent. They could be microaggressions, which are small things that are probably unintentional that chip away at somebody's sense of self. They could actually be blatant hate crimes. Microaggressions come out of a space of bias, implicit bias. I know implicit bias is like this buzzword everywhere. Everyone's talking about biases, right? Are we all familiar with implicit bias? Which is those beliefs, thoughts, attitudes that live below cognition of how you see the world. And those are confusing because they also help us with our survival. But it's the thing when you see somebody, how your brain calculates if this person is safe or not, or if this situation is safe or not. And our biases inform that. And that's why it's so important for us to check our stuff and begin to disrupt those so that we can be responding appropriately. So I want to talk about microaggressions because this is intention versus impact, right? So we may not always intend to misgender somebody, use the wrong term, ask somebody about their spouse in a gendered way. We may not always intend, people have public conversations about the LGBTQ community all the time. I don't think they realize what that's the impact to individuals who are actually living these lives. And what it does, though, is it can lead us into this space of like not knowing. So as a person, I'm a queer Black woman, and so I move through the world experiencing what would be considered microaggressions pretty much every day, whether I'm aware of them or not. So one example is I have gone into stores multiple times and have not had somebody speak to me when I walk in. Like that, a year ago that happened. And then the person I was with was a white woman, and she walked in behind me and they're like, "Hi, can I help you today?" And it got so bad, like it was comical in a really dark way, but like we would do it on purpose to see what would happen. That begins to just chip away at you every single day because you just don't know where it's coming from. And so I had a boss once that told me I stated my opinions as facts, and which is true, I do. And but when she told me that, and because it was a boss and it's like this power thing, I was like, what does that mean? And so what that came to my mind is like, I'm an angry Black woman. Like that's exactly where my head went, because all my life I had been told about shrinking and being quiet and not being too loud or boisterous or all these different things. So I couldn't even like filter her comment, I couldn't filter it in any way other than what is she actually saying about me. Other examples of microaggressions, What was your birth name? So when you meet somebody who is transgender, non-binary, what is your birth name? You were such a cute boy, though. Karen, you would look so pretty in a dress. You don't look gay. That's not a compliment, by the way. I would never guess that you're trans. No, that's also not really a compliment. Or this is one of my favorites, is one of two things. How do you know that you don't like men? Or you just haven't met the right one yet? Those are all examples of microaggressions. And for young people, like, we are really big at KYC about not engaging in adultism. So when you work with young folks, you throw on this layer of like, you're young, so you don't really know what you're talking about anyway. And you just haven't met the right person. And so it's just diminishing their existence and who they are and what they know to be true about themselves. Who in here works with youth? Thank you for the work that you do. I have 2 teenagers at home as well, so yeah, youth are very interesting. But it's hard work, and it's exciting work. But what I want you to think about now is, we know that our young people, just giving you some stats around like how trauma shows up in their life for queer youth, LGBTQ plus youth are 120% more likely to be homeless. There are 4.2 million homeless youth in the entire country, and statistically, LGBTQ youth make up 40% of that number. So to bring it home, in Columbus, we've counted around 3,000 homeless youth in general. So if anecdotally, we know that just under 1,500 LGBTQ or young people who are homeless are part of the LGBTQ community here in Columbus, Ohio. Poverty is traumatic. Being homeless is traumatic. And when I say youth, we're counting ages 14 to 24. So these aren't even young adults necessarily. We know that our young folks are more likely to feel unsafe in their schools. And by unsafe, that means they're getting misgendered, they're not using the proper names, they're experiencing bullying, assault, physical and or sexual. They're also being excluded and left out of things. We know at home, the main reason that our young people are typically homeless is because they are kicked out of their home for coming out as gay or lesbian or queer or trans or non-binary. We also, as I shared, that trans women of color have the highest rates of murder and suicide, murder and homicide. In terms of suicide, we know that of the numbers of young people who attempt, 40% of those are from the LGBTQ community, and around 40% of that number are trans or non-binary. I think it's actually closer to like 51% as I'm thinking about it. Yes.
So have you ever, like from Kaleidoscope, have you guys ever thought about starting like a shelter, like, I know you have a drop-in center, but like the overnight shelter, like the Huck House, but just for LGBT?
It's almost like you're a plant in the audience. So yeah, we actually, just briefly, we've offered 3 new housing programs that are unrolling. One is a host home network. It's urgent or emergency housing. Basically, community members volunteer to be hosts for young people to stay on a short-term basis. There are no youth-specific shelters here in Franklin County. And the shelter system here which starts at age 18, most of our young folks don't go there because they get their things stolen, they get assaulted. Sometimes they are not put in the shelter that affirms their gender identity because they don't have the right documents. So with the host homes is a little bit different, but it's emergency housing. We have a rapid rehousing program which can provide move-in, rental assistance, other financial assistance to get folks out of homelessness and support them. And then this will be in 2020, opening up a supportive co-housing location. We have a carriage house behind our center. So we are working on that as we speak. Awesome. Thank you for the question. So all these things that we're talking about is trauma. It's traumatic, and so they're dealing with it. And then that doesn't even take into account what happens at home, just day to day living in this world. And so as we look at our young people, to bring it back into like how we respond to trauma and prolonged stress, any one of these things we may see in our young folks. We can see it in each other too. But, looking at argumentativeness or verbal and physical aggression, My niece, I have a 5-year-old niece, and last night I was on the phone with my sister, and she was losing her mind. Like, she wanted to put on her Easter dress early, and my sister said no. And she's in the background going, I want to wear the dress. And she was like stomping, I could hear her stomping. And this is not how Rylan typically is. I was like, Wendy, she's lost her mind. She's like, I know. And then she started throwing things. And she's like, I'm gonna let you go so you don't have to hear this. And she hung up the phone. And I talked to Wendy later, and Rylan was hungry. She hadn't had dinner yet. She was tired. She was with her dad all day, and so she hadn't had a nap. And she was just with her brothers who were older, and they were being very nice to her. And so those are stressors for a 5-year-old little body that couldn't handle it. And so she was really defiant and argumentative. She was agitated, and she was angry, and she was actually irrational, more than a typical 5-year-old. Little to no impulse control. And this was just in the day in the life of a 5-year-old who has like everything and the resources she could need. And so I just want you to expand and think about how this shows up for young people. You can change the slide. For young folks and what they may be experiencing. Any questions? I know that's a really fast and quick one. Yes?
As far as the host home, how do those children get to their home school? Like,
Host homes are for ages 18 to 24.
oh, okay, so they've graduated or thereabouts.
Perhaps, and so for the host homes, they would need to either be within a mile from a bus line or able to assist with transportation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and also, I live in a neighborhood that I consider less progressive, and we have, I've probably seen 2 trans people in my entire neighborhood in 20 years. And what would be a kind thing to say if I wanted to say something kind to a trans person other than just like, have a great day, thanks for your help or anything? Is there anything that just something that would brighten somebody's day who might feel marginalized in the environment where we live?
Why do you think what you might do to anybody else isn't good enough?
I just feel like they're having a lot of trauma probably, and they probably feel really unseen and unheard. And it kind of breaks my heart just because I see the way, like the lady that works in the bakery at my neighborhood grocery store, I see how she gets looks and things like that. And sometimes I wish I could say something to give her just a little bit of support or just a kind word. I'm not obviously gonna rock anyone's world, but is there like just a kind, not pandering way just to be kind and just say like, I see you and thanks for being here?
Any other way that you'd express kindness to another person is just the same. And so if someone's being rude to me when it's your turn to see her, just be like, hi, it's good to see you today. Like there's no special brand of kindness to utilize for folks who are part of these communities. But I just want to kind of support you in that. I remember I've been working with trans folks since 2011. And when I first was like, I'm an ally, I'm going to make them feel better. So if I would see somebody in the store that was obviously trans, which is not true and wrong, and please don't ever do that, I would look at them and smile. Because I wanted them to know that like, I see you, you're good. No, don't do that. Please don't do that. Anybody, I don't care who the person is, where they're from, but I get it because I want people to feel like they know that they belong here and I want them to feel affirmed, but I don't have to treat anybody any different than I would anybody else in terms of kindness goes a long way. And so just be kind. Thank you. Any other questions or thoughts? Yes?
INA stand for LGBTQ.
Intersex and asexual. Intersex is people who are born with a mix of reproductive organs or genitals, and so may have ovaries and a penis or vice versa or both, and so the term is intersex. You know, we're born, doctors are like, oh, it's a girl or a boy based on our genitalia, and if it's ambiguous, they usually perform surgeries. Whatever the parents think is the right way to go. And then A is asexual. I know Karen shared about this a bit more. It is essentially not desiring or experiencing like any kind of sexual or physical attraction or response to people. This is a really growing identity at Kaleidoscope, which I'm very fascinated by. And so we've got young folks who have girlfriends or boyfriends, or they're dating or partners, and they will hold hands, and that's where the physical contact stops, because they're not interested in anything further than that. That's just a really short, general example. Yes?
What are common misperceptions of the LGBTQ plus community, and what can we do to kind of quash that when we see it in public spaces?
I'm going to ask you all what the common misperceptions are, actually. I'd like to know.
I work at 2 different inner city schools. I think that there's a perception that our LGBTQ kids are just having a ton of sex.
Yeah.
And that's just like, they just leave school and they just go have sex. And like, that can't be, because they're also on track and they're also getting like a 3.8 GPA.
Yeah.
So they're making time to get out of their futons and, you know, like, but I think it's a misconception.
So like hypersexuality, or they're hypersexualized perhaps, and maybe some deviance.
Yeah, they have fuller lives probably than what the overall.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we got hypersexuality, absolutely. What else? Mm-hmm.
So my wife and I have 2 little girls, and people watch us at the stores and restaurants and stuff like we're going to do something different, and that we're not boring and have no lives and don't
So boring, isn't it?
And it's super like, we're kind of like this, well, what are they going to do? But we don't do anything. It's not what I didn't do when I was growing up in a straight heterosexual home.
That's why I love the word lifestyle, because there is this perception that there are different ways of living. And like there's something exciting that might happen, or you might, you know, choose Honey Nut Cheerios all the time, and that's all we eat. You know, like no, there's not. But like that's what people think. Yes.
So my middle son is pretty like non-binary, and just like it just really sort of doesn't even get this idea of gender, and it's quite illuminating and amazing to watch that and to support my son doing that. It's interesting because my child's room, so I'm being thoughtful, right, and trying to, you know, describe it. So my child's room is a mixture of like My Little Ponies, as well as like, you know, just some stereotypical kind of sort of girl boy kinds of things. And I'm pretty open with my friends about that. And there's a few friends that I have that I think are scared that like my child might turn their kid like something else, you know what I mean? Or like
it's contagious. Right.
It's like it's contagious.
Yeah.
And it's this way of just allowing my child to sort of become whatever that child is going to become as they grow, right? And even just this exercise of using this intentional language, and I try and do that with my child as well. But sometimes I slip into the things, and that child responds in that way too, and that's all good. But like the friends sometimes, and they're supportive and all, but I could tell sometimes they're like, why does he have that? You know what I mean? Or like, I don't know that I want my kids sort of being around this area where, you know, it's art supplies and all the things, but a fairy might show up, or, you know, or like sitting next to the basketball, you know what I mean? Like it's just this sort of whole, you know, thing. So that's the stereotype, is like that somehow there's a contagious, or especially in kids, right? Like kids that are kind of expressing or presenting in certain ways, and it's just like, in preschool there was a trans child, and their parents really sort of supported that child, and I could tell the parents were like, oh my gosh, is this gonna like mess up my kid because they've been exposed to this, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. My son, he's almost 17, and when he was 6, he came down the steps and he was crying. It was around Christmas time. And I'm like, why are you crying? He's like, Alex has a Barbie and I want one too. And I was like, okay. He's like, but boys can't have Barbies. This is coming out of a household that is has always been very intentionally gender neutral and inclusive and affirming. This stuff starts young. It gets in us at very early ages. And so no matter what I tried to teach at home, he still had the thoughts that it wasn't okay for boys to want to have Barbies. And so, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's why I think that, like, I think we should always have these, like, trainings like this, and I think it's important that, especially, like, as adults, we come and listen and learn and talk and communicate, but I think that the biggest thing that, like, the biggest way we can learn about gender is kids like hers, because you don't see that every day, and they have something that we don't have, and they can teach us things that we, like, probably can't teach each other or learn in any other way. And that's, like, just kind of amazing.
Thank you for, oh yeah, go ahead.
A good friend of mine who was an immigration activist died in the past 10 days. And Mindy, you know,
Ruben.
Right.
Yes.
And there was one piece of one of the news stories where somebody was talking with him or interviewed him and assumed he had a wife who was Hispanic.
Yep.
He said, first of all, I'm queer,
Yep.
and I have a partner, and why would you assume my wife would be Hispanic?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, lots of layers of assumptions there. And you know, and other ones are, you know, how we ask questions of like, oh, are you married? What's your husband do? Or something like that. We just gender spouses. But I thank you for your question because it's actually taking us into the next space, so it's so relevant. But this is really what you're asking is how do we disrupt those, but how do we as a community support recovery for each other, for ourselves, for our young people. And this, we know recovery is when people improve their health and wellness and their lives are self-directed, that's thriving. And healing is not just surviving. We don't want people to survive. We are called to be more than just survivors. We need to thrive. And so when we think about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this is something else that I'm like really serious and addicted to. You know, you've got our basic needs of safety and shelter, and then we move to like, you know, having food, and then like love and belonging is actually a basic need for people to experience love and belonging. Before we can even get to the top of like our most highest thriving selves, we need all of these things. But your question is totally like, what are the opportunities? How do we disrupt this stuff? And so one of those is, well, go ahead.
Yeah, so establishing safety, we want to give you the opportunity to come up with some things, and we'll also give you some suggestions. But what are some things that you feel like would establish safety after having this discussion, or that you're doing now in the work that you're doing with youth or wherever you're working? How do you feel like establishing safety is something that you're doing or that can be done?
We work for an organization, and we just we wear our name badges to have our pronouns on them, and we work with youth, so it's just like a little visual cue that like we're a safer place.
Absolutely. You walk in and you see pronouns, it's intentional, and then I know that I could probably share my pronouns at that point. Anyone else?
Well, we have t-shirts because we march in Pride. Mm-hmm. So I try to wear my t-shirts as much as possible because it has the rainbow and, you know. So I think, and I get lots of comments. People will come in and say, thank you for wearing that.
Yeah, you're like a walking, welcoming advertisement board. Thank you.
Advocating for gender all-inclusive restrooms.
Awesome. Advocating for gender all-inclusive restrooms. And that can be with legislation, that can be within your own place of employment, that could be within your own home and space and how you talk about restroom usage. There are children not using the restroom.
Like when someone shares something, or when someone, sometimes in spaces, people are reacting in ways, like young folks will maybe share something and it might spark something or maybe be something unexpected, like about maybe their identity in some way. And what I try and do is sort of just model some kind of a response that just kind of like, okay, you know what I mean? Like, okay, that kind of thing, instead of like making some big deal about what they just said, or just, if the student comes to me and we need to sort of discuss something really specific, that's one thing. But just in an open space when someone shares something, just modeling a kind of like, okay, not making this huge deal about this one particular thing and going off of the responses of other students.
Sure, so what I'm hearing you say is be pretty much neutral and hold space.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, wonderful. We got someone over here?
With the restrooms, one of the schools that I work at, with our elementary, has gender creative bathrooms. And so you think of, people try to say that they're that young, they don't know, but just having that conversation as young as you can and just being neutral about it. Yep, it's a gender creative bathroom, go where you feel you need to go.
Our gender identity is in us between the ages of 3 and 5. So they know, we know. Like I said at the beginning, we just don't think about it until there's a variance or something is different or outside what we consider normal. But it's already within us.
I didn't hear you talk about internalized oppression, and all the other oppressions that I'm aware of. We all got the messages early, as you're saying. Mm-hmm. So that part of the struggle of healing is our own messages that we have about and I mean, you and I talked about
Yes.
that and some other things, but internalized oppression is going on. So it's not just the rest of culture. You got the cultural messages that we all got, even if they were conflictual for you, those messages got in early.
Yeah, actually, I was just thinking that. So with my experience, I think that when we're looking at what's internalized, I think in creating safe spaces and holding spaces for youth now that are so creative and so open and so vast, sometimes I really have to check my stuff because I'm adulting super hard in my head. And I'm like, no, don't do that. Or why would you say that? Or I'm like fixing my face a lot to be neutral because whatever my stuff is coming up. So that's like the first part of holding space is like really removing self and like the need to be right or anything there, or the need to like control anything. You remove that. Obviously, if there's something or someone's going to do that's going to cause them harm, of course, then we step in as an authority in that way. But otherwise, like we're just there for you to be and express yourself, and it's not about me. And so that is a big part of holding space, for sure. And that's a part of building the relationship. So giving a sense of control, taking that off, right? And then understanding triggers, you all are doing that by being present today. As far as organizational programming structure, obviously a lot of you work with youth. What are some of the programs you have in holding space for that?
We have, it's our Celebrate Youth group. It's basically just a diverse group where you can come and just talk about being yourself. It's confidence building, self-esteem. Just come as you are and talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Awesome.
At our Y, we had the boys running club in the fall, and it was like, wow, we have all these activities for the boys to do. So then we started up #FuturesFemale. So twice a week, the girls meet downstairs, and it's just a space, and it's open to anyone who identifies as that gender. It's totally up to them, but it's just a space for them to come talk about. Like, we use a teen outreach curriculum, but some days, if that's not what they want to talk about, it's a very student-led program. So,
One of the schools I work at, I heard a boy crying in the hallway, and he was saying, I hate living like this. And he was really, really crying. And I went out, and he was talking to a girl, and I said, do you want to come into this alcove and sit down and just talk? Because it's more private. I don't know. And so they were just talking, and then I emailed our licensed clinical counselor, and I said, here's this child in the hallway, what do you know? And the first thing the counselor said was, well, why did the student go there? That's not a designated safe space. And so when you talked about adulting, I love that phrase, and I feel like you put a really good word to it. The clinical counselor didn't understand that that child was going to have a breakdown wherever that child was going to have a breakdown. That child couldn't wait to get to a bench 2 stories higher to verbalize how upset she is. So turns out the child is trans but not out at home. And we are not, so big faculty meeting called, oh my gosh, faculty meeting. What do we do with this trans child? Oh my gosh. And nothing. We were not allowed to do anything except just respect this child and make this child feel safe. Other than that, nothing. So the kids, and this is just how awesome the student body is, these kids blow my mind every day. So they think of stuff I never would have thought of in the 80s. Cover up their name tag on their sweater so we can't see what school they go to. They all have a rainbow here. And they march through the hallways. Every time the bell rings, let her wear her skirt. And it's a 4-story building. And that was a lot of marching. Wow. And it was awesome. Because when she came in that morning, she had on the uniform, she had on the skirt. And right away, administration was like, you're going over here. We have to call your, we have to do something. But the kids were so committed to her safety and to her journey. And it was just amazing. And I just am so in awe that they created a safe space when the hands were tied of the faculty members that wanted to do nothing more than just put up the little safe space sticker on the doorways. Because they said no, because then the faculties that don't want to put that up will be seen as like haters. So faculty, they just said you'll do nothing. But the kids took up the lead, and it was powerful. And then last Saturday night, She was prom queen. And it was just really cool. And I'm so proud that our kids advocated for her, because all these people that needed their paychecks, nobody could do anything.
Definitely. And education obviously is important, and it starts with us as adults, right? But if we really get out the way, the youth will tell us what needs to happen to create that space. Awesome.
I'd like to brag about the Church for All People down on Parsons. Not only do we say, you know, at the beginning of every service, everyone's welcome here, no matter who you are, what you have done, whatever. But also now they're doing listening in their Wednesday night service. So people sit around a table in small groups, and each person has 5 minutes to talk or not talk. And people are basically just supposed to listen, no saying anything. And it's very transformative. It's very magical and accepting, sort of the way of stuff, she said.
Wonderful.
And I think it's important, when we talk about structural or organizational change, there's two things I want to say is there's so much you can do, even if you don't work with young people, but just to like be good in the world, and for any young person that might come through your door, grocery store, or for adults, we still like this stuff too. So there's things that you can do from like, you know, an HR function is looking at like your policies for family leave or family policies or how insurance, you know, who can cover what. There's things like can an employee can they transition safely on your job, and what does that even look like? And so how are pronouns being used, and putting pronouns even on a name tag or in your signature line, because what that does is it says like, we are open to diversity in this way. And maybe you're not an expert, but you get what pronouns mean to people. And so, you know, having the bathrooms that are gender neutral and making sure that it's not all the way across and farther away from everybody else. Those are things that you can do. I think also understanding like cultural shifts take time. And so just acknowledge that. It takes time, and you're going to maybe make mistakes or missteps or not do it all the way right, or, you know, not get buy-in all the time. But like, it does take time. And so if you're in a leadership role where you work, like, you can make change very easily just by making sure there's trainings that happen there and make them mandatory. There's a certain amount of mandatory trainings. You know, we talk about cultural competency. You know, our word is being culturally responsive. How can I go beyond just knowing what words to use? How can I respond to the types of diversity that are walking through our doors, whether it's young people, whether it's people of color, whether it's queer folks, like whatever the diversity is, you want to be able to respond to it in a way that holds people. And I just remember what I wanted to say. I was at this meeting about a month ago, and this person was talking about the word welcoming. We all like to say, like, we're welcoming, churches are welcoming, I welcome all people. And what they said was so striking is, when you say somebody's welcome, you're still owning that space and saying, you get to come into me or come to where I am. But when somebody belongs, that's their space too. And so I just want to invite you to just think about the difference in those words as being a welcoming place, a welcoming person. How do you communicate belonging to somebody so they know that they're there? And so when you think about where you work and where you're at and what you can display or what you can do different, the question is, how can I make sure all this difference knows that it belongs here?
All right, thank you for that excellent presentation. I know I learned a lot. And let's give one more round of applause also for Sharon Stevens, Shelley from Columbus Metro Schools as well, for the beginning part of today's session. I think that something that touched me particularly was the movie and learning how social media kind of has effects on young children today that may identify as being in a protected class. And it really shows the importance of these Lunch and Learn series and why it's important to the Commission, because discrimination is not a static thing. It doesn't stay the same, and it's our responsibility to be reactive to it and proactive about what's going on in the community. And whether or not you knew it, today you demonstrated the value of coming together. And you may have signed up for a little bit of responsibility you weren't sure for, you didn't know about. So it's now our responsibility to go out and take what we learned and make sure that I don't get complaints of discrimination. No, I'm just kidding. For more information on all of this and location and updates, is you can visit columbus.gov/neighborhoods. Write that down. You'll find community programming on there, which has all of our events. We invite you to look at all of them. And that's where you can find more information. Thank you, everybody. Look forward to seeing you next time.